Hey everyone, welcome to another video. This video is all about my experience interviewing with Proton in London. I'm going to be covering the company context, everything about the rounds, what was expected, what did I do well, what was my key learnings, and my final outcome. Let's get right into it. Let's start with the breakdown. So, what I'm going to cover is the company context, how I applied, the overall timeline, how much time does it take, how many rounds does the whole process have, the levels and the engineering culture at Proton, and also the key lessons and what advice I would give if you're interviewing or if you're good up interview at Proton, and what was my final outcome. So Proton is a privacy first company based out of Switzerland. It's I think it's a 500 to 1000 member company. It has multiple products. Proton Mail, which is the most commonly used Proton product. Proton Pass is another one, and Proton VPN. Proton Pass is a product where you store your passwords, and it's a VPN product. So their core value is privacy first, very security focused. All their engineering is around privacy first. So when you're interviewing with them, you should always keep in mind that they tend to keep that always in check. In terms of engineering style, it's more of a startup style, product led. And I remember one of the engineers mentioning that it's more of startups within the company. So that's how the company has laid its engineering culture. The major languages are PHP, which I've seen most of the teams are using PHP, but Python is something which the marketing tech team uses. So that is something I was interviewing for the marketing tech team because I am a Python engineer. So Python usage is quite limited, but most of the engineers are working with PHP. In terms of how did I apply through the Proton careers page, there was no recruiter or HR round screening in the first. Everything was resume based screening. They focused on how strong your technical skill matches. Would you be a good fit for the role? And do you have all the technical skills needed to fulfill the role? Hence, there was no HR introduction at all. The first round was directly with a manager. And again, as I mentioned, the emphasis was on startup mindset, ownership, product thinking, and communication. So the first official round was with my manager. So I would call it managerial plus culture fit round. So this lasted for an hour. It was all about your experience until now, or you can also call it as your resume walkthrough, the projects you worked on, the hackathons you've done, or something you've built on your own, and also about your education, your learning style, quickly learn things, how you keep yourself updated, to be honest, and also your startup adaptability. How good are you at building products? How good are you at thinking product? And how good are you at communication? So they also check you right in the start for cultural alignment. So if you're not going to be culturally aligned, they're not going to even go to the technical rounds. So a lot of things, dynamic, how good are you with ambiguity? Most of the times, most of the tasks are ambiguous. You really have to figure out your way. Ownership mindset, very important for a startup or a company like Proton, where you own things end to end. And also communication, because a lot of your communication is got to be with non-tech people. So how simple you're keeping your communication and how easy it is for non-technical people or stakeholders who have no idea about tech to understand what you want to convey and how you're going to convey those things. So it lasted about an hour. It was positive, and I managed to get to the next round. So the next round was take-home coding. Now this is one of the longest take-home assessments which I've done. Ideally, take-home assessments last for an hour or so. Either you do them through HackerRank or you do them through coding platforms. But in this case, it was, if I remember correctly, it was Codility. So it lasted for 4 hours, but I think I managed to complete it in 2 hours and 30 minutes. The project to do was the low-level design of an authentication system in Python. So basically, when a user logs in, you have a session created for the user, you create a database record for the session, and then you also have you assign the user access tokens and refresh tokens. And there's also when the session expires, you have a session expiration, and then you also need to know how these tokens work, refresh tokens, and how when an access token has expired, how you use a refresh token to get a new access token. So I don't want to get into too much details about how an authentication system works in this video, but it's more about the understanding of how things work under the hood and how your time to live matters, how expiration works, whom not to give access to. Those things are extremely important, and you should be very clear on those things. Expectations, again, very good low level design, separation of concerns, and security awareness, which is, as I mentioned, we don't want to be giving access to someone who should not have access. And again, trade-offs and design, you should always keep that in mind so that any component is extremely clean and separate. So the next round is live pair programming. So two tech leads come on board and they interview you for an hour and a half, again, which is quite long and tiring. So there are two parts to this interview round where you have part A and part B. Part A is more of hands-on coding, and part B is more like a review, like a pull request review, which you would ideally do for a team member in your team. So the first one was cache system. So the authentication problem we did solve the previous round. So this is designing a cache system for the same authentication system. Now, the note here is the code will not be the exact same code that you had written. So it's going to be a solution they had already. So it's more or less extending that solution right in front of them. And in terms of caching and why it is used there. So now in terms of authentication, you don't want to be hitting the DB so many times. Let's say for a web page, you want to check if the user is authenticated or not, yes or no, and then store the session in cache so that when user calls it again on a different page of the application, it is handled from the cache. So it was more coding for that, writing for that, handling time to live in the cache, and setting cache expiration strategies, and also looking for failure scenarios where you have, again, as I said, it's more about not giving access to who should not have access to the system. So basically, whenever in doubt, you just invalidate your cache. Also, the important part here is what happens when your access token expires, or when do you invalidate the cache. Those are some important questions to answer before you even these type of rounds. So going to the next round, it's more about the pull request review. So the code given to me was in PHP. Now I have no idea about PHP, but when you're programming, all languages are, or the syntaxes differ, but a class variable is a variable in all languages. So they gave me, I think it was a GitHub pull request. So they made me review a code readability, naming, error handling, and also they checked on my communication, how I communicate with the other colleague, and any issues or any parts where backward compatibility is not taken care of. And anywhere you have questions, it's always good to ask them before assuming or before going the wrong way. It's always good to stop and ask questions if something's unclear. So that was the live programming round. So the next round was system design. Again, lasted for an hour and a half. A very senior tech lead came over. I was a bit anxious to begin with because he just gave me a problem statement and then he asked me to begin. But he was quite good. He was extremely strong. So we used Excalibur to design the entire system. So the problem was monitoring system. Monitoring, it's just not web. It's just not any application that you're monitoring. But the problem given to me was any monitoring in the entire company. So that meant every API, every server, literally every system. So in this case, it was, as I mentioned, the asking questions is so important. and not assuming things and going the wrong way. So make sure you always pause, ask the right questions, and clarify if anything is unclear or something needs to be clarified more. They often are very helpful in those things. Now, if you think about this problem, it's the ingestion part of the monitoring system is the hardest part. Now, the person who's consuming the ingested data is doesn't care about latency. He doesn't care if he sees the values after 10 minutes, 1 hour. He's completely fine with it. But the ingestion part, where let's say you have a million requests coming into this system. So those are the points that you have to think of. Architecture choices, what trade-offs are you making, and are you using how are you storing your data, how are you persisting your ingested data, and how are you going to create those summaries. Again, this was definitely, it consisted a lot of high level design, but there was API design to it as well, of what APIs would look like for this monitoring system. And there was also how would you scale the system. And let's say you have million points coming in, but you wouldn't have those many users who are using the system at a real time. Let's say 100 people would be, let's say, seeing the data, but again, as I said, the ingestion part is the harder part. Showing dashboards, summaries, those are a lot more easier parts. So it's all about getting the high level design correctly first. And then once you get that, once you're able to explain it clearly, make good design choices, and also think of trade offs, then you should be completely fine. Now, this was the final interview before the offer comes out. So, this is ideally again a managerial cultural interview, which is done by the skip, who's the manager's manager. Now, the focus here was a lot of scenario based questions, behavioral questions. As usual, they'll ask you, tell me a situation where you had a conflict, you had a disagreement, and what did you do? Also, decision making. So, usually in tech, there are many strong opinions coming around you. How do you manage those strong opinions? How do you make sure that your voice is conveyed? And it's more about talking about those, taking ownership of what you do, accountability. Again, these are just high level things, but more of your definitely take into account, and whatever you say, all those stories, which is with the help of STAR, which is situation, task, action, and result. If you use that method, I think you'll be able to clearly say about these situations. Now, tips I could give you here is prepare in advance, especially examples, because when you're in an interview, it's quite hard to remember some of these incidents, especially in detail. And often use I, don't use we, because we just means the team. Remember that this is your interview, it's not anyone else's. So make sure you always use what, so that it just clearly reflects what you did. Now, the levels and engineering culture in Proton: startup mindset, companies of startups. Engineering levels are divided into 3 levels: level 1 ABC, level 2 ABC, and level 3 ABC. Now, level 1A, and then the next one higher is level 1B, and so on. So the role I was interviewing for was in level 2C, which is just before level 3A and B, which where ideally the leads or the staff engineers sit. So if I were to go for this role and I perform well, I would definitely be pushing for level 3 A in a few years or months, depending on the team. Now, the key lessons and any advice which I would give are, I think tech wise, it was very clear, thinking of trade offs. They never ever bothered when I took a pause to think. That's very important. Explaining trade offs is another important thing, where you communicate why you chose something over something else, and pros and cons of both. Again, everything is pros and cons in tech, and it's very important to communicate them. Communication is another thing which people overlook, especially technical people. When you're coding, when you're talking about system, when you're doing live programming, PR reviews, it's very important that you keep telling or keep saying what you are thinking. I know it doesn't come to you naturally, but it's extremely important that you convey your thinking out loud. Don't worry if it's a very small thing or very advanced thing. Just make sure that you are keeping the interviewer or the interviewers right. You are letting them know what you're thinking. And what I do differently, I would definitely prepare some behavioral examples earlier because, as I mentioned, on the spot, it's very difficult to remember these situations. Now, I know it's more about experience as well. Someone who's very senior would have gone through so many things. And also, if you could explain some decisions extremely simply rather than going extremely complicated, that would help as well. So, how would you apply? I'd recommend applying via their careers page. You tailor your resume for product impact, emphasize any startup experience you have, show ownership and adaptability. Now, the third point, which is emphasize any startup experience, is something I lacked. I am currently in a bank, and that makes me disadvantaged because I don't have a startup experience and I'm not coming from a startup. So, but I did have good hackathons. I did have a lot of GitHub projects which I've done on my own or built stuff on my own. You need to keep showing ownership and adaptability. It's important because you would be expected to own stuff end to end, be it technical stuff, be it non technical, or be it even stakeholdership or stakeholder management. So, if you love building products, if you love to work in a big company, but you want to feel like startup, you like products, you value end to end, I think it's definitely a good opportunity to have a look at them. Now, what was my result? I didn't proceed to offer stage. My feedback was I had extremely strong technical fundamentals, which is I was good at coding, I was good at system design, PR reviews, live coding, extremely good at trade offs. Where I fell short was I needed to clear the skip interview, where I didn't give good enough situations, where I didn't make good use of the star technique either. Now, what I communicated was what I would do in a situation like that, but what I should have communicated is any past situations of disagreement, of strong opinions, and how I managed to support my point of view. Now, this was an extremely good process. I know things sometimes don't go your way, but that's completely fine. You definitely don't have to get every offer in the world. But if you're going for Proton, these are the things that you should remember. And I'm sure, even though I didn't make it, you will definitely make it. This is a wrap for this video. If you did learn something, that's very good, and I wish you all the best.